in Boston, they can't have it.
Come sit here. Come sit here.
Mark, how are you?
It's actually been good.
You do indeed.
Wow. Didn't talk so much, we could have been done soon.
Yeah, my Uncle Billy's not doing well.
Good evening, Rita. Good night. Good night now. Good night.
Rita, next time don't be so talkative.
Good night.
Good to see you. Oh, no. Will you live up the Cedar Street?
All right, the next item on our agenda is an update on the water emergency. I asked that this be put on our agenda just so that we get a better understanding of where we are, what issues still lie before us. I take it that Mark is here for that purpose.
Yes. Just give you a quick timeline, which I believe you should have had in your packet. We were last before you on July 1st and asked that the board actually adopt the water conservation status that we're under now. And they delegated to us to go ahead and move forward with the measures we felt were needed to ensure the sufficient water supply. That happened on July 1st. Our tanks were down about more than 30 feet from where we like to see them at 4 a.m. And what tends to happen is the tanks fill to their highest point at 4 a.m. and then 4 to 6 a.m. or 4 to 7 a.m. most of the sprinkler systems come on, and then the tanks will actually drop from that point. So we were kind of concerned. We came forward with Dick had brought in a 10-day forecast that showed no rain and 90-degree weather. And I think for the first time in my memory that a long-range forecast, I mean, it really was spot on. We didn't get any rain until Saturday, a week after that, Thursday, so it was 9 days with no rain, and most of the days were in the 90s. We were real concerned that continued outdoor water demand was going to leave our tanks dropping and dropping. And we took the measures. We brought in, and you've seen them, the 6 message boards around town. We sent people out to post the businesses the next day, that day after you declared the emergency. We went to some of the higher residential water users and asked them to just turn your sprinklers off. Did some stuff on the town website, and actually saw some recovery over that long weekend. I think as we explained to you that night, typically our weekend days in North Reading are actually our higher demand days than our weekday days, because we don't have any large water using industry. On the weekends, we see that drop early in the morning, but then kind of continues to be a big demand all day long, whereas on a weekday, we see a big concentrated demand in the morning, but our tanks kind of recover midday, and then people come home and we see them drop again and then fill overnight. So we actually saw the tanks recover pretty well. And by about Wednesday, we were, of the week of the 4th, we were in relatively good condition. Second issue did come up that week. Town of Andover actually was having a similar problem to what we were having. They were seeing so much demand that their water tanks were dropping and they weren't keeping up with it. So they called around 4 o'clock on Wednesday and said they wanted to cut back on one of our interconnections from, we were taking about 900 gallons a minute through that interconnection, and they cut us back to 500 gallons a minute on Wednesday afternoon. Our tanks actually held through Wednesday into Thursday. Then Thursday afternoon, they called again and said their tanks were not recovering, and they basically wanted to shut off the one interconnection for a day or so, which they actually did on Thursday afternoon. And we saw our tanks drop by Friday afternoon. Friday we made the decision to go out with the reverse 911 over the school system, and we actually got the police involved at that point to go out and start. We gave them a list of about our 100 largest users and asked them to go out and notify people that, you know, if you continue to water, there are going to be fines assessed against you. We did see our tanks drop fairly significantly Thursday into Friday. Called Andover on Friday, got them in the afternoon, and they said, look, we're going to have to stay off until Saturday morning. Tanks dropped again into Saturday morning, to the point we were almost back to where we were when we came to you to declare the water emergency. Called Andover Saturday morning, and they said, yeah, we can open you back up to the 500 gallons a minute, which was part way back. It was where we were after they partially choked us off on Wednesday. And luckily that day around noontime the showers moved in. Once the showers come, our demand drops way off and the tanks pretty much filled over the next day or so.
Which says that people are still watering that.
There's some big demand out there still, yeah. Since then, we've pretty much been able to keep the tanks full. I think we have relatively good compliance, at least enough to allow us to keep the tanks where we want to see them. We have had 2 water main breaks in the last week, which was kind of scary. That was one of the other reasons we'd come to you, was our tanks are low. Now, if we have a big fire or we have a water main break, we're gonna lose a lot. We, can lose the ability to protect the town. So it's kind of odd that, summertime, I don't think there's any frost going in the ground or coming out of the ground, and we saw those 2 water main breaks. So we're gonna take some steps, actually make some digital pressure recorders so we can throw them out on the system and record the pressure like every second over a couple of days and see if there's any pressure spikes or things going on in the system.
What street were they on?
They were in 2 different locations. One was on Park Street between Damon and Gould, and the other was up here off of North Street on Euclid Park. Euclid Park has been a historic problem. I'm not sure exactly what's going on with that water main, but it breaks about every 2 years in certain locations. But again, the pressure recorder should give us a little bit better data on that. Currently, we're still taking the 500 gallons a minute from Andover. We could potentially open up to 900 gallons a minute. Even at the 500 gallons a minute rate, we're filling the tanks by midnight, and what happens when the tanks are full, the Andover interconnection starts shutting off, and then if we got even higher, our own wells would start shutting off. So by about midnight, the Andover interconnection shutting off, and it stays off till 6 or 7 in the morning when the demand starts up again. So we have some leeway in the demand, which is a good thing. Makes me sleep a lot better than I had been. And that's about where we are now. I did have just one other thing that I pulled off the Mass DEP website that I thought I'd share with you. This is their list of, actually as of July 13th, it's the current communities that have either mandatory or voluntary restrictions. The green, as they come around, you'll see the green, town shaded in green are the voluntary restrictions, and then the orange ones are the mandatory restrictions. You can see there's a big kind of a hole where Boston is. That's the MWRA communities. They're not under any kind of restrictions. But by my count on the website, there were 77 communities with some type of restriction on them. And of those 77 communities, 42 of them have been added since June 15th. So a lot of towns are under the same situation we are. It's kind of scary watching the reports on the news when the town's ability to produce water and pump water into their system through their treatment plant is being outstripped by the amount that's being used by people, and it's going on day after day after day, and you're seeing your tanks go down and down and down, incrementally down, but it's a scary thing. And it's the first time, I've been doing this for about 20-something years, and it's the first time I've ever seen that, and it's pretty widespread this summer. Obviously, we've got some heat wave issues, but like I said, I'm a lot more comfortable that the actions we took a couple weeks ago were warranted at the time and have proven since then to be, the right decision to make.
Mark,
I'm sorry.
there were a couple questions that I had. One was that when we were informed that the Andover had cut back the restrictions, what I heard, I don't know whether it's true or not, was that they did not want to declare an emergency, and as a result, they solved their problem by cutting back our water supply.
Yeah, their comment was they did not want to do a mandatory water ban.
That's why it's not on here?
That's why it's not on there. By being voluntary, they didn't have to report to the state. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's a 2-page form on the DEP website. Takes about 30 seconds.
No, but maybe there are citizens that come back at them and say, we don't want, why we're selling water to North Reading, or we're doing this or that. We don't have enough water for ourselves.
Historically, Andover has not, other than if they have an issue with their treatment plant that they need to do maintenance on, and they'll call us and tell us, in 48 hours we need to shut you off
that's
for a
different.
day.
That's a different situation.
They have never restricted us. They have called once or twice and said, look, we're getting close to the point where we may need to restrict. We just want to make sure North Reading has at least as stringent restrictions in place than we plan to put in place. This, it really came out of the blue to me, which was a
Well, it raises a real concern for me in terms of, you know, this is a water supply, and, you know, if they can just flip the switch at will,
No, they shouldn't be.
they shouldn't.
No, because the contract, the 1991 contract that exists between Andover and North Reading, I looked at, and there is language in here concerning impairment of supply, and it states that the only circumstances that Andover's not to be furnishing water to North Reading continuously is a force majeure event, and I don't believe, in my judgment, is what happened was not a force majeure event. So I think, from my perspective, we need to open up a dialogue with the town of Andover, because my view of the situation is that the situation was not, did not meet that requirement. And so we need to ensure that going forward, it doesn't arbitrarily happen and hamper the town of North Reading to the point where it creates a public safety emergency, so.
So you're gonna open up a dialogue
Yeah,
with
I
them
think
on that
that's,
issue?
that's the way to do it, and, so there is language in the agreement. It's interesting when you go through here, and keep in mind, this was written 20 years ago, so I can tell you that agreements written 20 years ago are much different than what they are today. It provides an upper limit of water of up to 1.5 million gallons a day, but it doesn't say anything about a minimum quantity of water that needs to be provided. And if you look at it, is for something that's as substantial as this, that I believe the amount that we pay for purchase of water is about $1.1 million a year, in excess of $1 million a year. And you figure that the value of this agreement is tens of millions of dollars, and it's probably 4 or 5 pages long. So it's probably not 100% adequate in terms of a document that we want to necessarily use going forward.
Mr. Prisco?
So there's nothing in that contract that talks about the gallons per minute
Up to 1.5 million gallons per day,
per day?
correct?
Okay.
There's nothing in there saying they have to provide us with a minimum per day.
Right, well, what I'm asking is, can you even get to that with 500 gallons per minute?
No.
No.
Well, we actually, we have two interconnections. We have an old existing 1950s vintage interconnection on Central Street. They didn't shut that one off. That one can give us about 400 gallons a minute, and that one was on the full time. So they didn't completely shut us off. On top of that, we add about 900 gallons a minute max on Main Street. So they took, 60% of our available supply away from us. 60% of that,
Yeah.
1.5 million gallons a day.
That's scary.
The other issue is, first of all, I commend you guys for getting the word out so quickly and the actions that were taken, but it appears that even through that, and, even after the signs are up and the messages go out, we have a number of citizens that are just ignoring the law. And, I understand that, we used to be, I can remember days in summers where we were on alternate
Yep.
rotation, and that is, by the way, I believe is the law.
That is,
Right. However, the past, I think since I've been on the board, we haven't had a summer where it mattered, I guess, and people have forgotten.
yeah. To be completely honest, last summer, it rained all the way through the middle of July.
It didn't, we didn't care.
We didn't sell enough water,
Right.
to make us in the black at the end of the year.
Mhm.
So, we like to sell water, it's how we balance our budget. So do we get out there and knock on doors at 4 o'clock every morning and tell them they're on the wrong day? No, we don't. And-
No, and I'm not suggesting that, it was necessary, but people of habit, right?
Exactly.
And so, I take that into account as part of the issue. We're going through a re-education. But I think there's still a number of citizens in town that are just scofflaw. And, which raises the issue of should we, as a board, reconsider the fine structure? Because the fine is pretty minimal.
Yeah.
And I guess that, some people may look at it and say, I've invested 30, 40, 50, maybe $100,000 in my landscaping, and, so I pay a few $100s on a fine, who cares?